Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. And as always, I'm with Stef. Hi Stef.
Hi, Sarah.
We're doing this episode slightly differently because we are actually streaming this episode live into our private Facebook group for our Patreons. So we've got some people who are joining us live today and some people who'll be watching it later, but they are lucky enough to get the raw, unedited version. And you folks are going to get the super polished, smooth version, right?
As always, yes. I've been very excited to do this and also to have more of an understanding of who's listening as we've been meeting more patrons and people in our live monthly calls, just to have faces that we know. I picture people now that I'm actually speaking to rather than talking into the abyss.
Exactly that. So the subject of today's episode was actually chosen by one of our patrons, and we put a vote out, we put a poll as to which episode they wanted us to do live. So if you don't like it, don't blame us.
I love this topic personally.
Me too.
Which is,
yeah. But everyone around me is dieting. So talking about the discomfort, challenges and difficulties around trying to reject dieting or moving away from dieting when it seems like everybody else is so involved and in it, and what that can bring up for us and what it means for how we navigate those situations.
yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking about how I feel like I experience this differently depending on the group that I'm with. And I find that especially more in the beginning of this process, like when I was around certain friends and family, I would find myself just getting more annoyed. Like when I would hear about people dieting and what program they were doing now, and I would have this like annoyed sort of like, oh, we're still doing this kind of reaction. And with other groups of people, I would feel more intimidated by it. Like I would feel like, oh gosh, am I doing something wrong? Oh my gosh, I can't, like it would just give me a less than feeling. But I think that it does bring up the question of this feeling of less than, and also a feeling of connection with different people, because I visit my family in the summertime, especially, and my brother and his wife are very into low carb eating. My brother's been doing keto for over 5 years at this point. And I used to feel like when I would be with them, I'd be like, oh, we're going to do keto together. Like it would be this thing, like we would all get together and I'd be like, okay, bring out the eggs, bring out the cream. Like this is what we would do. And it was sort of this shared, I don't know, it was like this way of connecting with them. And when I stopped doing that, I remember feeling starkly like, don't do that. I didn't want them to be doing it anymore because I wasn't doing it anymore. And there was this feeling of like that vibe was gone. It was like this absence of community.
Yeah, and I was thinking along a similar line this morning, because when I hear people talking and posting about, what it's like with other people around dieting, the bit that I think doesn't get spoken about so much, and I talked about it recently and people were responding in a relatable way, is that, that thought that you have where you don't want it to work for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's like, it's a bit extreme to say you want them, maybe not extreme, say you want their diet to fail or you want them to fail at dieting, because I think there's something very human and validating about this. This is something that, in some ways I felt like that's what I was as a binge eater. I was a failed dieter. So to see other people being or seeming to be successful at it, I wanted everyone else to have the same journey as me, to validate my journey, to discover that diets don't work, and to come back and go like, yes, we're all on the same page. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that was everyone's journey and therefore we could all relate? And that's just not how it works.
Because I think you do sort of adopt an identity too when you stop dieting and you're like, okay, I have figured something out for myself and I want everyone to see it in the same way that we did with dieting. It was like, I need everyone to see, I need to be validated here. And it's been a road for me anyway, of the drop of comparison altogether and being enough for myself in general, which is an ongoing thing. And it shows up, we've talked about whack-a-mole. Like it pops up in other places now in my life. But around food, I find that I've sort of made more peace with it can work for you. Like it seems it works for my brother in the way of, I mean, he's very much on my Fitbits all the time. And like there's ways in which that shows itself. But I don't feel like I need you to not be doing that for me anymore. I respect the differences and I don't feel that like, look at me not diet. I don't feel that way anymore. I think that's
Mhm.
faded. And I think that's hopeful because it wasn't like I had to work on that. It just gradually really did fade the more confident I became. Not confident, the more I don't know, the more that this really did feel right to me. I didn't need to prove it so much anymore. And I think there's hope for that for anyone who's feeling like that sort of pull of comparison that still exists.
As you were talking, I thought, yes, that's me. I think I'm at that point where I feel it doesn't mean that about me. I've accepted that about myself and I no longer view it as a failing. And then I had a thought between you and I, what if one of us did a U-turn on this whole life after diets, non-diet thing and said, no, 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 I found this way of eating and it makes you thin and it stops you from binge eating. And one of us went and did that.
Mm.
Like, as I was playing out that fantasy in my head very quickly, I thought that would trigger it off again.
Yeah.
Like that would really make me think, gosh, I thought, and so if Steph had arrived at it doesn't work and then she discovered it did work, then what does that mean about me?
Well, that's interesting because that's like, then it's about how you see. I always feel like it's about connection then. Cause it's like if you connect to someone who you respect or feel like and you're in community with, and then they leave your community, that's like a, oh, is it me? Is it what's wrong with me? Or I want to go with them. And I think that's why this topic resonates with so many people because who's not dieting? Like who's not talking about it? I don't know if anyone in my life, in my like actual physical life, um, doesn't dip their toes in. Well, that's not true actually, but it's more often than not that somebody is. And so there's this feeling of like, do they know something I don't know? Because it's so much safer to feel like there's someone who's not doing something with you. Like there's just, okay, I have a person, I have a community, I have another energy to work off of versus feeling like you're sitting in the middle.
That would probably be it, though. It would be if you were to do that U-turn, my mind would be going, well, what has she figured out that I never could figure out?
Yeah.
So even more so than the community part, because whatever your beliefs are, you can find people that agree with your beliefs and are going to affirm it. And you and I have spoken a bit about this recently because I've been receiving quite a few messages from people who've insisted that they recovered from binge eating by following a certain stricter, quite strict way of eating at times. And I have to be able to put my hands up and say, whatever works for anyone, like, all I want is for people to feel free. So if someone's saying, actually, by doing this in a more strict way, I feel freer and I feel better doing it this way, I'm almost reluctant to say that because I think that there are people who then might think, well, that's what I should be doing. If there are people who are doing it like that way, why can't I be one of those
Mm.
people that are doing it that way?
So I think that the way that I have learned to make more peace with that is I think there's a difference between someone who's figured something out, or whether it's about food or anything else, for themselves in a way that it really is about themselves and it's about how they work, and it's something that they're not necessarily talking about or making an identity out of. I've got a friend who, it's not something we openly really discuss, but an observation, I've seen that there's certain ways that she manipulates food sometimes that goes very much in line with how she is as a person. Like she needs structure, she needs concrete feedback. Like she's very that way as a person in all ways. And she doesn't talk about food at all in this way, but I know that she does things like I can see. And that doesn't get to me because I feel like it really makes sense for who she is, and it there's something about it that she needs in a way that I am not like that. I need that, and then I don't need that. I need to rebel, and that's how I am in all ways of my life. So for me, I can look at it and say, I understand that for her. I understand why that makes sense for her, and I know how she operates, and it's not how I operate, so I can't compare it. Versus someone else who might be engaging in the same behavior, but talking about it a lot and sort of like claiming it. I've figured it out, and I'm and kind of like having that sense of superiority almost around it, and like kind of showing it off. To me, that's more triggering to me because it seems more false. It seems more like that's a willpower type of thing. It doesn't feel like it's authentic. And when something's not authentic, I want to call it out and I want to poke holes in it. But that's a distinction for me is somebody making an identity out of it and sort of like spreading the gospel about it, or are they just doing it because there's something inside of them that propels them to work a certain way?
I think I feel pretty comfortable when it comes to how I need to approach this in order to find balance with food. My fear comes in, and I feel like maybe we're weaving off topic a bit with this, but I'll just say it quickly. My fear comes in around, what if I'm misleading anybody else who doesn't benefit from the way that I think about it? And I know we've touched on this before as well, and it's just a case, I think, of coming back to, there is so much about this, there's so much about disordered eating and how it presents itself that you and I can't possibly know. And I think all we can do is come along and talk about what's true for us and hope that those who resonate with it will come and that will be useful for them. And those that don't can go and do whatever does resonate with them, and having to put that trust in other people. But I think sometimes I almost want to say that out loud to people because I don't want everyone looking to me as having some kind of perfect answer for them,
Yeah.
or going against their own intuition to follow suggestions that we might make.
Yeah, I agree. And I think my perspective on that has really evolved over time. I think that there's different factors that come into play. Like, I think I went when initially came into this work, I was like, okay, I have something figured out based on my experience. And I think, yeah, there's many people who've had similar experiences to me that have benefited from the things that I have done, whether it's not me specifically, but it's generally the elimination of restriction, like creates an environment where the body is not begging to binge anymore when restriction is a major player in the binge urge. But I've also met so many clients along this path, and I've seen how trauma impacts a binge urge, or the binge response in a way that isn't necessarily related to restriction. And I've had to sort of change the way, like everybody has a different story, everybody has a different privilege, everybody has a different history. And so the ways in which there's not one straightforward answer as far as that. And so even dieting for some people as a coping skill to get through a day, to condemn that and to assume that everyone who's dieting is wrong, that's not a whole story, because somebody may really need that to be coping with a whole host of different things. Anytime that I have tried to get into someone else's way of doing something, it's rejecting the things about me that it doesn't make sense to do this for myself. And it's a comparison issue. I think that this for by and large is a lot about comparison and assuming that because someone else is in one place that we should be there. Yeah.
Mhm. Agreed. What are your thoughts on asking people who are talking about dieting and it's bothering you, asking them not to talk about dieting? How do you tend to come at that?
Personally, I don't ask them not to. Because I I feel like I want to be able to handle that discussion outside of myself. I want to be able to hear it and know that I don't have to absorb it. And so that's a practice that I really value in general. So it's something I try to do. Um, I want to be able to be in the presence of it. That said, in the beginning of my recovery, I did specifically talk to my family about that. So I said, I don't want to I don't want to engage in discussions about food or body. It was a lot about body image as well, but it was only for them. And that was the one group of people that I felt like I had to set that boundary with initially. But everyone else, I just disengaged myself from being pulled into that conversation as a practice. How do I feel about it though in general? I think for some people I've seen that that's really empowering for them to be able to say, I don't want to partake in that discussion. And I've heard other people say, sort of echo back, like, I don't feel comfortable saying that, or I don't want to have to say that because it would feel more alienating in many ways to, sort of put that out there. And that calls more attention to it for some people.
I think as well, there's going to be different levels. For example, if you were on a bus or a train and you heard people behind you talking about dieting, it's unlikely you're going to turn around and go, can you just stop talking about dieting because I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Likewise, acquaintances at work, but close family and partners. This is one that comes up a lot, actually, Steph. Maybe you've worked with people who are experiencing this, where their partner has this very regimented way of eating, or their dieting. I've had clients who have decided to do it together with their partner, and then they have felt like they haven't managed to do it, but their partner has carried on and been quote unquote successful. And the difficulty of being around that as well.
Yes, very much so. I hear a lot from people who said my partner disapproves of me doing this. Like, this is not, they're not on board with this. They don't see how it could be healthy. And that's, it's one thing to talk about, okay, like not comparing and not allowing other people in. But when you're living with someone, like there's a real in your face reality of that being present for you, and how to navigate that, and how to feel like how to stay in your own lane on that. Like how do you do that? And I think it's not something I've personally had to deal with, because my husband is not, he evaded diet culture, and he just doesn't, and he supported me. But in my family of origin, that's a place where diet culture is valued in many, many ways, aggressively and passive aggressively. And being in that environment is really hard for me, but I don't have to be in that environment all the time. So I acknowledge that I don't necessarily even have all the experience of being able to speak to it. But I can say that from the people that I have worked with, that there has been success with the raincoat. We've talked about the raincoat before, that sort of raincoat idea of almost a visual armor around us, of hearing things and understanding things and having them penetrate, and then allowing them to slide off and kind of deflect and not absorb into the skin. I think that visual imagery is something I've used in the presence of people when I am being triggered. But that there's an inclination, I think, sometimes to convince, to really strongly defend. And I respect that. And I feel like that's how I'd be like, and that's what I did with my own family, where I was like, no, and don't you know this, and there's this, and there's this study, and there's that, and haven't you heard, and can't you see? And that never got me very far. And it ended up feeling worse, because I felt like I was begging for approval and begging for validation. And I found it more effective of taking a less like I have to fight about this, I have to prove something approach, and more of this is how I'm doing it. And I don't appreciate any feedback to deter me from that. Like, you can have your opinion and you can do your thing, but I need to do mine, and I need you to respect that, and leaving it there, and not moving into all of the explanations and the over explaining, because that tends to, I think, feel that we're from the back foot as it is, because it feels like you're defending something that almost you're trying to convince yourself of as well. And I think it takes away from the simplicity of, I'm doing this and this is where my head is, and I need it to stay there. We love connecting with our listeners, so we host regular community events on Zoom. We also have a private Facebook group for our Patreon supporters. Please visit our website, lifeafterdietspodcast.com, to find out more.
For more details about how to contact us or to work with Sarah or Stef individually, please check out the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. I think we have a need to feel understood and seen, and I think there's often that longing for those close to us to get it, to really understand. So when I'm working with people and they want to talk to family members or partners about this, my question is always, what is it you want from them? And it's normally, I just want them to really understand and to see my point of view. And sometimes the question is that even possible? I don't know about you, Steph, but I feel like if I had never experienced binging and binge urges, I don't think I could understand it. If you took the example of maybe a partner who is taking a very different approach to you, being able to have that open dialogue and that communication, because the other thing that I see is that there's this projection of meaning onto it. So maybe a belief that their partner must be judging them. Or if their partner does make a comment about them losing weight, the projection is that they must think I'm not good enough as I am, when it could be that actually they've just seen you for years being desperate to lose weight, and have also bought into the idea that you would be happier if you lost weight. So it's around this belief that this is what will make you happier, that can feel like a judgment, can feel like they think I'm not good enough, but I think it's really us feeling like we're not good enough, but then putting that on them. So actually being able to move into those uncomfortable conversations where you even begin with, we may not be able to understand each other here, but what I would really like from this conversation for us both to have had our say. Because I think, yes, having certain boundaries, maybe topics that are off limit, can be helpful. But I think there is a danger of censoring something, particularly in an intimate relationship, where then the conversations don't get had. And it becomes this hidden thing and a misunderstanding between two people.
Michele says, I find it difficult when family talk about health and the idea that being higher weight is a big risk factor. Yeah. I mean, I think with diet culture and thinness, like weight itself as an aesthetic, it's easier to sort of defend that one, even internally, and to say like, okay, that's not my value system anymore. But when you bring health into the conversation, it feels like, well, of course I care about that. And that feels like a moral imperative that I care about that. And also the dialogue out there. I mean, the medical community enforces this. So you're backed into a corner when I think you're talking about health and weight, because you've got no arsenal except for Instagram people talking about this. And like there's some books, but no one's heard of them. And it's like the raging conversation, both in personal communities and in medical communities, is that, like, how are you gonna talk yourself out of that one? And that one for me brings up that one used to trigger me very, very much, because that was the battle cry from my family. It was the health. And it's so easy to get pulled into that one, because one of the books that I recommend, Health at Every Size, but also Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison, I went through that book, and every chapter seemed to have a different thing that I was like, yes, where was that study when I needed it?
Well, I find rather than trying to convince anybody of a health at every size philosophy, I come at it from a mental and emotional health first. Is pursuing weight loss harming your emotional and mental health? And I'm guessing that the majority of people listening to this, the answer would be a resounding yes, because if it's not, what incentive is there to stop trying? I think it just grinds us down into the ground so much that we just can't bear feeling like we're just failing all the time.
Yeah. But what you said is the point exactly. I think we're and just as I even responded to this, I went right into the physical health and like how to defend. And it's so much, I think the conversation really is more about like, what is this doing to my mental health? And can we please bring that into the conversation? And not only that, but even if you are talking about physical health, the roller coaster of dieting, and obviously if it worked as easily and straightforwardly as we in theory say it should, or as people are saying it should, then it would be a non-issue. But the fact is that it's on again, off again, it's restrict, it's binge, it's I've got it together, I don't. And that how is physical health even being maintained in that space, right? Like that's not doing favors for any of us as far as weight cycling and weight stigma on that, and mental health and emotional health. I mean, these are factors I think we need to bring into that conversation. And I think that one of the reasons that's difficult, and I'm speaking for myself in my house of talking to my family about this, emotional and mental health was not valued. It was like silly talk. It was, you're too sensitive, enough, just buck up, So I would feel like I was in this corner when I was faced with that, because I didn't have the studies to necessarily reference. And the reason that I was doing it, which was so much in part for my mental and emotional health, I didn't feel were valid as far as this conversation. So I just was like, shoot, why am I doing this? Like, what's wait, have I thought this through? And then outside of my family unit, I would be like, no, of course, yes, I've thought this through, because I could validate my own mental health. Like I valued that. But even when you're talking to colleagues, people aren't talking about the mental health piece and the emotional health. It's not something that's in that conversation as valuable. So I think that's part of why we can be left feeling like, on my own, I seem to understand this, but when I'm in the presence of other people, somehow that gets really minimized.
Have you created an affiliate link for Christy Harrison's book? Because you should. We just had somebody message to say that they've bought it.
It's That one and the Fuck It Diet by Caroline Dooner. I'm pretty much like the spokesperson for these books. I mean, they're great places to start, but um, yeah. Do you run up against, or have you seen your own reactions evolving over time, or do you still feel triggered when you're in the presence of conversations around dieting?
No, I don't feel triggered in conversations around dieting. I find myself much more from a curious observational perspective, like watching people's reactions. I've got one group of friends where there's somebody who will be the one most vocal about their distress about any small amount of weight gain. And they also happen to be one of the smallest people in the group.
Hmm.
So actually, when I notice that going on, I'm looking at everyone else because I'm trying to gauge other people's reactions. There's much more of a curiosity because this is an area that I'm just always learning and interested in. In terms of, that's what I was trying to think earlier, like what would actually trigger me now? And I think maybe somebody who I felt I really related to where they were, and
Yeah.
then
Okay.
they seem to find something else. Because for me, that kind of trigger, it comes from a comparison place.
Yeah.
So watching my friend who is smaller than me distressed about her weight, I'm like, oh yeah, I get that. Like I see that, I talk, I hear about that all the time. So I think it would take something bigger and something different. And so it's not normally the behavior of other people. I think we talked about on the episode about photographs, when I saw that photograph of myself, that is probably, if I look at the last year, like one time that will always stand out in my mind is when I felt particularly triggered and I could really watch it going on and just go, I'm not going to make any decisions from this emotional place. And it was fine. It passed. And I was aware even at the time that it would pass. But no, I think it takes quite a lot. Right at the beginning, when I very first started working with binge eating, somebody perhaps who was in a small body and struggling with binge eating. I think I found that confusing at the beginning because I didn't understand. And that, I think, is one of the dangers when you go into something that you have lived experience in. I think it takes a while to really start hearing all the different perspectives because we see it through our bias to begin with, like what you were saying, realizing that for some people, it's all about restriction and for others, it's not. And I think for me, I probably realized right at the beginning, I wasn't as conscious about the role of restriction and being in a quote unquote socially acceptable or even socially admired body was quite hard for me to relate to. But having spoken to and worked with these people over the years, I get it and I hear it. And the level of distress about the binge eating itself is on par, regardless of the size of anyone's body. The extra layer about weight and navigating the world can vary, according to body size and any extra challenges that some people might face.
Yeah.
So, no, what about you? Is there
Um,
triggers for you?
yeah, a bit, or ones that are harder. It depends on the group of people I'm with, and the people in my most immediate environments are, it's really a non-issue most of the time for me. But there is a group of friends that I have, and when we get together, there's more that comes up for me. And this is because a lot of the women in this group are very strong, powerful. Um, I admire them in so many ways. And one of them in particular has a body like mine. So we both have this sort of like mid-size body. And her career is rooted in wellness. In fact, a couple of them have careers rooted in wellness. And I used to be very much on their side of the fence with the wellness culture. And we bonded over that. And that was something that I had an identity with them around that. And then I did a 180. And it's hard for me sometimes because I know what it's like to be very convicted in, the idea that sugar is the devil, and the morality of health. And so when I'm in the presence of them, it's very difficult because when you know what someone else is like, where they're coming from and where they're rooted, it's like, oh, I know your conviction is as strong as mine, right now. And that's okay. But the fact that I admire them and they have personality traits, very, very charismatic people. And so I think the projection of attributes when we're talking about the way someone's handling food is like, what else are you admiring about that person? You know, what else did they embody that you're feeling this pull of I'm less than? And it's really not about their food beliefs or their food stance, but it's about how they present and the ways in which we feel like we're not that. And so I just notice I have to catch myself a little more often in the presence of people who have qualities that I really admire, and to not tangle those up with their stance on food and wellness. They come from a completely different background and they have not dealt with binge eating. And so again, it's like, well, that is the difference. That is a big difference. My mental health is severely compromised when I go into that place, and theirs is not. And that is increasingly okay with me.
One of my biggest fears is about my blind spots. I can remember when I first decided to train to be a therapist, and you go into personal therapy for years while you're training. I thought the goal was to uncover all my blind spots. And I realized it's about, I'm going to get existential with you here, Steph.
Okay, we do that.
It's about a constant pursuit of truth. Like, what's actually true here? What's real? Like, intellectually, I know that there's probably no absolute truth, but I feel like I'm always searching for it. And I think this is my way of trying to create some certainty in an uncertain world, a way of trying to get some control. So it's like I'll have these moments where I feel very certain that what I believe is true. And then moments where I'm like, oh my goodness, like this existential hole of believing, not even that I believe it's not true. I'm more distressed by the fact that I did believe it was true. And it's this real fear. It's such a common theme in my therapy. It's this real fear of being deluded. Like, I'm the deluded one and everyone else can see it and I can't.
Yeah.
And so for me, this was what I was thinking about, this idea of people being in a situation and everyone around them is dieting, like that fear. What if everyone's actually right? And I'm just kidding myself. I'm just kidding myself because I can't actually keep to a diet. So I'm just convinced myself that diets don't work when actually they do. And I'm deluded.
Yeah. I've missed something. You might not be alone here. It's interesting. I feel like, that's been.
Well, it's funny you said that. I nearly said it as a universal truth. And then I thought, no, just talk about it from your own experience. So I'm so glad that you said like I'm not alone.
You're not. I feel like that's a huge theme in my therapy where I'm like, I always say, I don't want anyone to think I have the wool over my eyes. Like there's this there's this idea of like, I'm aware. Like, and then what if on those times you're like, no, I wasn't, or what if I'm not? What if I have had the wool over my eyes? It's this, where does this come from?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I sometimes imagine though that, I don't know, there'll be some kind of research and they'll discover that there's a specific thing that in the brain that causes binge eating, and they'll just go in and fix it. And all this time I've been trying to help people emotionally and psychologically, and all along it was a physical thing. And like, I've just been making people feel like they were like even worse at it because they were struggling to do the mental and emotional work. Like, that's where the fear takes me when I think about how could I be badly wrong.
Well, that's interesting because we attack the emotional side before we've addressed the restriction side. And to me, that always felt like I was missing something. And I think that because you can bring in that physical restriction piece, for me, that's really, I don't know, that's really helpful because I think that drives so much binge eating. I really do. And it's not always the case. But I think if we address this from all sides, like this physical component and the emotional components, it tends to make a lot more sense. I think that there's much more of a holistic, like, okay, when you look at all of these angles, they make sense together. Versus just looking at an emotional angle. I think sometimes that can be, I felt misled personally that way in my treatment.
We're on the same page there because I think it has to be restriction first, followed very closely by the emotional, because I think some people do let go of the restriction element, not realizing how much the emotional is going on, and then they feel like they've been hoodwinked by the don't restrict people. But I really relate to that frustration of going around and around in circles just trying to do the emotional work. I spent 4 years in therapy trying to figure it out and not getting a scrap closer in those 4 years of feeling any better.
Yeah, me too. Decades. It was extremely frustrating. Okay, well, we're hoping to be able to do this again. And if anyone listening would like to join our Patreon community, we are on Patreon, and we have a Facebook group where we're having conversations every week about the topics. And yeah, I don't know the link to speak about it.
It's patreon.com/life after diets.
There you go. That's
super
why
easy.
I have you here.
Super easy. And then,
right.
rate and review, blah, 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 blah.
Blah, blah, blah. Okay.
All right.
Well, see you next time.
Thank you, everyone who joined us live, and thank you, everyone else, for listening. Thank you, Stef.